Welcome to the Provoke Media Podcast. I'm Megan Miller, Head of Content Partnerships at Provoke and host of today's episode. Today, we bring you Building Brand Trust with ESG with Hotwire Global Communications. In today's episode, we'll discuss paths and pitfalls to creating brand loyalty and trust through environmental, social governance communications. With us today is Global CEO of Hotwire, Heather Kernahan. Heather is a global marketing expert and business leader, has been featured in Fast Company, Fortune, Thrive Global, and Biz Women. Thank you so much for being here today, Heather.
Hi, Megan. Thank you. What a great topic for us to talk about.
Absolutely. Very excited about it. Before we get to chatting, can you give me just a bit of background about your role at Hotwire and the work you do with the Hotwire DEI committee?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm global CEO and I look after our 7 countries and almost 350 employees around the world. And my job is to lead the business, to make sure that we've got the right team and the right solutions for the clients we work with. And our clients are mainly technology and innovation companies. And my job really at the end of the day is to look ahead. It's to look ahead at what's happening in the tech industry, what's happening in the business industry or business at large, and putting together solutions that our clients need for today, but also for the future. And ESG certainly falls into this camp. And just a little bit of background on me, I came into this ESG space a long time ago. It was probably about 2007 is when I was first introduced to it, because I was at Autodesk and decided I was going to do my MBA. And as I was looking around, there was a new MBA called MBA in Sustainable Enterprise that was focused on ESG. And it was really new then. And Autodesk was a little bit in the sustainability space. So I started that program and then moved into the sustainability team at Autodesk. And we were doing really exciting things. We were writing the very first sustainability report for the company. I had no idea how to do it. We figured it out, putting together sustainability partnerships and advancing that. So they were very early on in this space. I learned a lot over the 2 years I focused on that job. And ever since then, I have built it into my career, which is why I'm really proud that we've got this as a focus for Hotwire.
Thank you so much. Great foundation. Before we fully segue into our conversation, I think if we can set just sort of a ground level definition of ESG, what that means today, sort of our sounding board for where we take this conversation, that'd be awesome.
Sure, yes. And for anyone who's been in the ESG space for a while, this may be, the primer they don't need because they already know it. But what I find is there are so many communications and marketing leaders out there that are being asked to think about ESG for the very first time. And there is a lot of content. It can be very confusing, but really just think about it as any learning journey that you've been on in your career. And first, I'll look back a little bit. Traditionally, ESG was a term that investors used in their analysis to identify non-financial material risks and growth opportunities. That's where it started. But in recent years, companies have really realized the business impacts, the positive business impacts on being a great environmental leader, a great social leader, and a great governance leader. And so really put simply, the environmental factors include how a business's activities impact the environment and how it's managing them. Some industries have high environmental impact, other industries have low environmental impact, but cataloging and understanding. That can be things like pollution, sustainability, greenhouse emissions, waste management, things in that area. The social part of it is about a business's relationships. So that's relationships on inclusion, diversity within their business. It can include topics like human rights practices, labor practices, working conditions. And then the last part, governance, is about doing good business and management responsibilities, gender equity, bribery policy, corruption, executive pay, and board diversity. So within ESG, you can just hear it. There are so many topics that layer in there, but that's the basic understanding that we'll work from in this conversation.
Sure. It's an entire web. Like it really does cover so much.
Yes.
Yeah. It's some of it, when I think about like why it's so, topic of conversation today, it seems kind of obvious because it's followed cultural trends, but then there's a lot that you mentioned in that list that don't feel so obvious as to why they're, investor conversations and why they're conversations that are surfacing up to the boardrooms and why investors and leaders have a vested interest in it. And I don't know if there's something that if there's anything you can speak to about that, in your role as CEO, but what you're seeing in the space of certain subjects that are really populating that maybe don't feel so obvious that fall under ESG.
Yeah, from a board level perspective, it really is about probably historically managing risk within a business, especially when you look at big global dynamic businesses. There might be a lot of risk associated with your environmental policy, your sustainability and what you're doing in your business and your governance. So the board's role is to manage risk within a business. So that had become increasingly complex. But really what I see boards doing now is looking at ESG as an opportunity to strengthen the business, to be a better employer for their people, to be a better community member. And it's no longer optional discussion at the boardroom, it is a required discussion in the boardroom. And the pandemic played a role, of course. I mean, ESG had been building for the past decades, but the pandemic accelerated it because there was a lot of corporate consciousness about health suddenly, mental health, physical health. What did that mean for our teams? All the playbooks for business just went out. But there were other factors that accelerated it. There was the murder of George Floyd. When that happened, there was an awakening in the US that societal issues and social injustice were no longer a topic for outside business hours. I mean, this is now part of what we need to talk about every day in the business that we work in. There was the wildfires. You know, I live in California, wildfires that turned the sky almost black in California, Oregon, Colorado. We have offices in Australia. They had horrendous wildfires, plus tornado season coming earlier in the Southeast, disrupting how people work because you're offline now earlier. And just all these global climate events, suddenly under ESG, climate became a real topic for the boardroom. And again, risk, because if half your staff is out of work because tornadoes have wiped out the power lines, it's an issue for business. And then what we saw in tech in particular were employees and the power of the employees to decide we're walking out even virtually during the pandemic because we're not happy with policies that are happening and the tight talent market. I mean, you take all of that and that has kept the pressure on ESG for boardrooms today. So that's what I like to see, is that it's not just about risk anymore. It really is about opportunity and doing better.
Absolutely. When we kind of talk about this full spectrum of ways that people can engage with ESG in their companies.
Yes.
For folks who are kind of merging into this space, maybe they're taking their company there for the first time, maybe they themselves are entering this as their new specialization.
Yes.
Are you seeing that like hyper focuses in some of these topic areas? You know, like I have to think it's like not enough to just have the title of ESG anymore. There are departments or verticals or areas of focus. And I don't know if that's how Hotwire is thinking about it at all, but curious if you've seen that or if you think that we will start to see that.
Likely over time. I think the best place for people to focus right now is really at the top line narrative about what ESG is for their organization. And that's where communicators can have a strategic role within the business and not be order takers of ESG. And I'd say if you're a communicator whose business is talking about ESG, but maybe hasn't put it on the priority list with your CEO, it's an opportunity for you to bring it forward. And we were looking at a stat the other day that said something like 42% of CEOs are struggling to tell a compelling ESG story. I actually think that's wrong. I think probably 85% are struggling to tell a compelling ESG story. So if you are starting out in this area, go even read the content coming out of Davos and look at the priority areas for the UN sustainability goals and start to read about the language of ESG within those communities. That would be a great starting point. But then start to gather up within your organization. What are all of the activities already happening? Because I bet there's a lot. And try to put it under the ESG buckets. And then engage your executive team in a conversation about, okay, this is the definition of ESG. Here's what we're already doing. How do we align this with our business goals and purpose as an organization? And that's a good starting point.
When we talk about organizational structure and sort of like a company's corporate mission versus how that happens within the company from an internal perspective, any advice or thoughts about the right or the wrong way or the easiest way to implement this in the company? It's not just HR's role anymore. It's not just, it's not just a committee's role, but how does it surface to, like, how do you bring that to become your company's shared unified mission or goals?
Yeah, I think it really does need to start with your executive team, because if you don't have the CEO and the executives running the business, the leadership team, building this into the business strategy, it may feel inauthentic and it might feel like a project versus a core part of your values moving forward. So I would start there, and I would start with the audit. And communicators do this incredibly well. We can make very complex ideas very simple. And we need to use that skill in this ESG conversation. Because if we can simplify and take the complexity out and choose small steps moving forward, we can really get a lot of traction. But do that,
Yeah.
start at the executive level, but then also buy in from other parts of the organization that have intersections with ESG, get their input, talk about it. Communicators can hold little focus groups around the business or talk to employees about what this means to them as a starting point to get underway.
When you think about your clients and
Yes.
beyond Hotwire's own, structuring, what are some of the changes that you're seeing with how your clients are starting to handle these conversations and within their brand messaging and within their corporate communications shifts there?
Yeah. I would say our clients are working really hard to line up the business values with the communications narrative. That's been a shift. Previously, I would say they were campaigns that were run around specific ESG topics, and it wasn't really connected to the values of the company. And that no longer works. You really have to be authentic in how you're communicating, and that builds trust. Probably more importantly with employees than anyone else, honestly. Your employees have to know that this is really part of what we do. It's not something that we just talk about. And so any opportunity you have to transparently share with your team, this is where we're at on the journey. This is what we're going to talk about internally and externally, and make sure that they feel like they can provide feedback. That's the way to get it out there in an authentic way.
Have you had the opportunity to guide any of your clients kind of with this process of bringing it to the forefront for them? Specifically, I guess I'm thinking, do you ever make a recommendation to start small, start with 1 or 2 topics and then build on that? Or is it better to say, new year, reset, we're going all in on everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, what I love about the tech industry, one of the things I love is that it's a test and learn environment. And the spectrum of clients we have, people are at different levels of this journey. So we do work with some companies who say, we really want to put in an ESG framework that will guide all of our decisions forward. To me, that's like the big project. And then we come in and we would do a consultation with them on, here are all the different ESG frameworks you can use and the pros and cons and guide them through that process, which is complex and takes longer. But we've got other clients who come in and say, I really don't even understand the ecosystem of my partner network and who cares about this topic. So for companies like Dell and IBM and Citrix, we've done an ecosystem audits to understand where ESG falls in priority for their partners. And then some companies come and say, I'm doing a sustainability report and my narrative doesn't look great. Could you just help me with that? So sometimes that's the entry point.
Yeah.
And we don't really, it doesn't matter to us where a company is on that spectrum. What matters to us is they are making a start somewhere, and we meet them where they're at, and then we help them build out their program over time. So we go as big as small or as small as they need.
Maybe we've kind of touched on this already, but we've talked about the things that are working, or the things that you're recommending. But are you seeing challenges too? Are you seeing like these hurdles that are making it a little extra hard to do it well or pull it off?
Of course,
in an authentic way?
Yeah, always. And as communicators, this will be common with other programs that we run and other topics that we work on. But consistency is always a problem, especially if you're in a complex global organization. Everyone's challenged with, even when you land your ESG narrative, how do you bring that all the way through, maybe to specific country markets, all the teams across the business, so everyone understands the message and uses it internally, consistently, and externally? That's usually a challenge we see. But probably the bigger one that companies are working through is how to take a human first approach on this topic. How to be vulnerable in this area, how to talk about maybe what's not going well, as well as what is going well, and be really transparent about that internally and externally.
Yeah.
That's it. And think audience first. It's not really about what the company wants to say first, but who are your audiences, and and what's going to resonate with them. We always have to think about that.
I think one idea that you've kind of brought up a few times in different ways so far is the authenticity and that internal component first, like starting inside first before you project outside. And interested to have you speak just a little bit about how you're seeing the impact of this on brand reputation and then increasing brand trust, brand loyalty for a brand. Obviously, that's the ultimate goal in, from a business perspective. Is that, how do you see that change and that impact?
Yeah, I do talk about employees a lot and internal a lot, because when you think about brand, it's not just an external vision of the company or an external experience. If your team internally doesn't have great trust in you and isn't experiencing a happy, not just happy, but like a productive, healthy, aligned organization,
Mm-hmm.
then you don't have a strong reputation with your employees either. So think about that internally first and then externally. Your team is also going to be the one to tell you that doesn't work for us, or we don't think that's real, and make the external message even better when it's time to go.
Yeah.
So when I think about brand trust and brand reputation, I do think about being first within your company and making sure that is excellent. Because those employees, we know there people are leaving jobs in record pace now. They will go be your customers. They will be the ones to refer you. They will refer other employees in the future.
Yeah.
So it's no longer external and internal brand. It's all one brand. And I advocate employees first.
We had some conversations a few months ago with a pharma company that was coming out of the pandemic, and it was very interesting to talk about how much, we've entered this era of business now where whether or not you want an employee to be a spokesperson, we all are representative of our companies. And the employee experience is really where that model of what a company stands for echoes. And I don't know if there's thoughts or some clients that you're able to think of that have been doing that really well, or some shift stories, success stories of how they've pivoted. But that's just been a really fascinating subject to see.
Yes. Well, that reinforced the point that I just made. Absolutely. That it is about employees. I'll talk a little bit about Hotwire, because we are on our own ESG journey. We've offered these services for many years. And last year we said our ESG approach is not as aligned to our values in business as it needs to be. So we need to be on our own journey of developing our ESG approach, the framework we're going to use globally. We had done an upgrade on our DEI strategy in a great way a couple of years ago, and we had built that into the business well, but now it's time to focus on the overarching ESG. And so one of the first things we're doing on that journey is talking to our own employees. So we're holding focus groups around the world to get input from people. We're then asking clients about what their priorities are when it comes to this area, but it started with employees. And that to me was an important step in this new project, and probably not one we had taken before when we were, launching new campaigns or new initiatives internally. We didn't always stop and spend the time with our team that we needed to, but we are this time. And that's why I'm such an advocate for it, because your employees will tell you like it is, and give you the information you need to make something great.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you're using, like you're talking about right now, having these conversations that weren't a part of the process before?
Yeah.
What are some of the steps that you think you might see Hotwire taking to continue to stay ahead of trends or priorities or issues of importance, to monitor that and make sure that your ESG program grows with or scales with the times?
Yes. Yeah, it's a great question, because we work mostly with communicators and marketers. And what I find inside tech and innovation companies, those people are so busy. Communicators and marketers are so busy every day in meetings, just trying to get through what's on their plate. And there's so many issues to manage that it's hard to spend time cultivating your own knowledge, attending industry events, listening to podcasts and webinars, joining organizations and groups that you haven't been a part of before. So that is, I would say, take a professional development step for yourself, even put in 2 hours a week for yourself, just to go source information that you wouldn't have had access to before. So that's personally how I stay ahead. I seek out events, people, content that I think is leading edge, and from people that I don't normally interact with. I think that's really important, is to get perspective from different industries, because you might see something different. So I do attend many of the investor ESG specific webinars. I mean, the finance part is not at all the world I operate in every day, but it gives me insight into what investors are asking the board, what investors are asking CEOs, and that helps bring information back to our team about services we need to build in, or programs that they need to put in place to anticipate what investors are going to be asking for in the next earnings round. And that you've just got to invest the time to do that outlook.
When a client comes to you at Hotwire and they're like, we're ready to embark on this journey, we're ready, like, what is that first kind of conversation, or what are the, like, what's the first step of the process that you take them through in identifying where they're going to need to go?
Yeah, a lot of talking in the beginning, because what we really want to understand is, where does this fall in the priority list for the company? Is it at the level of the CEO and the executive suite, or is it an initiative within the communications or marketing department? And that will help us gauge how to best advise that person moving forward. I mean, ideally, we love when it's on the agenda with the CEO, the board is asking about it now. And if it's at that level, the very first thing we'll do is, hey, let's take a full look at what's happening within your company already. Let's audit all of the areas of ESG, and then let's start a learning path together about what ESG is. So we bring them resources, articles, we look at the frameworks of ESG together with the executive team, and get them thinking about this in a very strategic way.
From your personal perspective, it probably varies.
Yes.
But if a client were, or in your experience throughout your career on ESG journeys with companies, if you had to pick 1, 2, 3 easiest areas to enter into the conversation, or to even get it on the radar, what are those core things that are like step 1, 2, 3? Anybody can start to scratch the surface on these.
Well, yeah, it definitely is a range. And I would say most companies, I can't really think of a client that hadn't been doing something in ESG, but just didn't call it ESG. I mean, a lot of companies have a DEI plan in place and they're activating something. Many companies have their governance models in place and they're working those. That's been a consistent part of the business for a long time. So I'd say a really easy way to do it is to go get an ESG framework. Global Reporting Initiative is one, for example, you could go look up, read about what the topics are under that, and do your own audit. It's probably not that tough as a communications person. You're so connected in the business, and just start to take a look at, okay, what are we already doing as a company? And then use that as a framework to take forward in your conversations.
I've loved that.
Started.
Yeah, I love that message, which we've heard a couple of times now, which is, you're probably already doing it. It just might not be bundled with that title. And so rounding up the different committees, the different interest groups, that meet over the lunch hour, whatever it is, like, you probably have some stake in this already.
Exactly. Yeah. And you just haven't called it ESG. But when you put it all together, then you're going to see, is this part of our business strategy or not? Right. And that's the good conversation to have with your CEO. Is this core to our business strategy? And if it's not, why not? When you look at all the topics that exist underneath it and the demands on businesses moving forward, it should be.
Pretty clear. Well,
yes.
A great note to end on. I think what an awesome primer you've given us today. I've learned a lot. I'm certain that our listeners have as well. But any parting thoughts from you, Heather?
I would just say, don't be intimidated. If you feel intimidated by this topic, do not be intimidated. Just start. We know how to do this as communicators. Do your research, start reading. Very soon you will develop an encyclopedic knowledge, and you can really use this as a strategic initiative for comms within your organization. So have confidence. And if anybody wanted to reach out to me, at Kernahan on Twitter, just DM me. I would love to talk about this with anyone anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here, Heather.
Thank you. Have a great day, Megan.
Likewise. This is the Provoke Media Podcast. I'm Megan Miller, and this has been Heather Kernahan from Hotwire.